You ever go to LinkedIn or go to a conference and see somebody else who's just nailing it with their content marketing? And I'm always curious, how are they doing it? What does it look like behind the scenes? So in this podcast, that's what we're gonna explore. I'm gonna ask dumb questions of smart people to figure out how content marketing is working these days and how you and I can take away actionable steps for our businesses. Welcome to the podcast.
Ben Wise, I am the founder of Storied.
It's easy to write off social media and be like, okay, yeah, it doesn't work.
Adapt it to who you are.
Conrad, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Appreciate being here.
So what kind of work do you do in content marketing?
I started off with emails, right? Just writing cold email campaigns, outbound email campaigns, then transitioned to like newsletter campaigns. And now I do like newsletters. I do social media writing, the occasional blog post, pretty much anything that someone consumes, I'm writing it, especially if you want a lot of eyes on it. So I do more of like the fun, witty, kind of maybe even dry humor type of posts. That's what I'm trying to do.
When you and I first talked, it was actually as a result of a cold email you sent me. I thought it was great. And I don't mind the occasional cold email if it's relevant and, like you said, witty. And we actually had a follow-up conversation, about potentially what a collaboration looks like. And you told me an interesting story about your origin story. Can you tell me that again, how you got into cold email?
So I started off as an SDR for a tech startup in Utah. I was living in Utah at the time, and Utah has a big tech scene. Silicon Slopes out there. It's great. And everyone was dialing on the phones, and I could keep up with everyone dialing, but like I wanted to be better than everyone. I mean, that's why you're an SDR, because you're competitive. And I like, if you're in sales and marketing, you're competitive no matter what. Like, even if you're quietly competitive, you're still competitive. Like, you don't like losing. I felt like I was losing because I wasn't in like the top 3 SDRs, even though I was like pretty mid-tier. And so I was like, okay, well, how do I level up? Everyone's using the phones. What can I do? And so I started looking into emails, and I started writing emails. And my first emails that I was writing were like paragraphs long, and they were terrible. And then I was listening to books, researching how to write emails. And I was like, I think I could do better. I ended up finding a good rhythm and started outperforming some of the reps. And they're like, whoa, what are you doing? And we started instituting cold email as part of the steps and improving the copy there, which helped us all produce more. That was the start of like, wow, like content can actually make the difference. Now, does it replace calls in any means? No, but like it does increase leads by a degree that is impactful for companies. And I was like, cool, this is sweet. So I just kind of dug into content from there and dug into it more and more.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you say content in the beginning, you're sending out cold emails, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which is, you could argue it as a form of content. I mean, you could probably easily persuade me, but someone else might say, well, that's not content, that's multi-channel. You went from calls and emails. Tell me about what it is about email that you think, was it just that it was another way to get in front of people, that they weren't answering their phones? What do you think made it work? Was it the way you were writing the emails?
To answer the argument or that point of view, that the 2 points of view that you mentioned first, if you view email as another channel, then you're selling through email, and email is not going to work for you. But if you view email as content, then the frame goes, okay, well, if it's content and someone's checking their email and they don't know me, how do I get their attention, right? It's the same thing with cold calls. Cold call is content, but you're trying to get their attention in 30 seconds, right? It's the same thing with the cold emails. So you're all just trying to create content that engages someone within the first few seconds, and then they want to listen to the next 20 seconds. And then if you're good there, they want to do the next 20 seconds, right? So I just framed what I was saying on a cold call, and I was just like, okay, let me frame this in an email. And it started working. Now, to frame it more appropriately, I will say this was back in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018 time when
before the advent of AI and every SDR having email in their tool belt.
Exactly. So email was like the difference maker as far as framing it from like a content creation perspective of, these people don't know me. How do I grab their attention quick, get them value, and then get them to take action. So you can see it as like a very, very small blog post. Instead of like a blog post having 1,000 words, it's like, how can I do it in 100 words? And now we've seen email transition from 100 words to how do we do it in 50 to 60 words? And so that's how I viewed email. I've always viewed email, and even like multi-channel, I just view it as content creation across multiple channels. And my question is, how do I get people's attention? You have warm audiences and you have cold audiences. Warm audience, it's kind of easy because they're like, I kind of like you already. So you don't really need to be super creative to get their attention and to keep them in. But for a cold audience, you have to get their attention, and you have to like break the pattern of what they're thinking or what they're doing, and then pull them in with value. And you can only do that through solid content creation.
You still use email now, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
all
that's
the
how
time.
you got in touch with me.
Yeah, all the time. I use it all the time. It might go away in like 5-10 years when like people are like Congress goes, hey, cold emails stink and no one likes them. We're going to make a law about it. Like privacy rights, security, data, right? Like
Cold email is not part of the can spam law. I just found that out last year. I come from I have a lot of digital marketing background, but sad to say, for whatever reason, I did not know. I'd done email marketing back in 2010. I introduced it to the nonprofit I worked for, a $4 million nonprofit, and I introduced their email program. But I always did it with these email service provider tools, and never really I never really did cold email. So that came as news to me that no, cold email is not spam. But like you said, maybe that could change as more and more people use it as a tool. What are you finding is useful or helpful for getting people's attention with email? Is it the shorter the email, the better? Are there specific words, or is it kind of a mindset? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the typical marketing answer that people hate. The answer is it depends. I think there's some good rule of thumbs. The shorter, more direct, the better, right? That's generally a nice rule of thumb to follow. But I broke that rule when I was doing an email campaign for lawyers who were selling negotiation services and negotiation training and classes. It was a longer email. But what I like with that is it targeted their audience a little bit better. Lawyers want extra context, so give them extra context, but do it in a way that's engaging. So my big thing when it comes to any kind of content is, okay, cool, I got them to read the first line. Are they going to read the second line, the third line, the fourth line, the fifth line, and the call to action? They read the call to action. Are they going to do it? If there's anything boring, if there's anything unclear, if there's anything that I have questions on that I'm reading that doesn't make sense, then I'm not sending that out because it's not going to make sense to the prospect. And then they're not going to read the next line. So every line has to be clear, concise, and like it can be digested well, right? If it can't be digested, then what's the point of sending it?
How do you strike the line between clever and clear in your copy, to use a framework used by Donald Miller and his story brand framework? He says, if you're clever at the expense of clarity, you will lose. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I thought it was better to be clever. But people don't know if you're clever if they don't understand the context.
There you go. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
If you're the only one that understands the context, you're the only one that understands it to be clever. And then it's like you said, it's not worthwhile. And it took me a long time to learn that because I was like, oh, this is so clever. And then crickets. I'm like, what's happening? But I'm the only one that understood that context. So I'm the only one that understood it to being clever. But if I could talk to you and I could say a quote from a movie, or I could say it in a funny way, like, oh, that is clever. I get it. Cool. But we don't have that tonality in email. You just have words. And then you have the inner voice on how someone reads those words. So do I risk being clever for someone like interpreting that to be offensive? Because like if I get you on a bad day with an email or LinkedIn post or whatever, your inner voice is going to read that as if I'm attacking you. And I have no control of whether or not you're having a good day or not. So I've got to be like, well, how would someone read this, whether they're having a good day or not? And if it's an attack, they're not answering my email. And if they do, it's going to be rude. They're going to be like, F off, you ever, you know, like, how dare you say I don't know how to run my business? It's like, oh, I was just trying to make a joke, but they don't know that. And if they don't know that and only you know it, don't send it.
It makes sense if you're working for a niche and you know there's an inside joke in that niche to use that, right? But often us in the content marketing world, we those opportunities aren't as often as you would think, right?
No, and it's like you said, if you know the inside jokes, go ahead and make them to the audience. And you could probably research like viral memes in accounting and you'll probably find a few, right?
Go on a Slack channel or two and find something. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can do your research and find them and you can make them witty and clever that way, but you always have to make sure that it's actually funny to that audience first and that it's viral, right? If it's funny on a subreddit page and 20 people have read it and laughed and commented that this was hilarious, cool. That's not representative of the whole audience. You know what I mean? Maybe take some elements of that, but don't copy and paste that, you know?
We're seeing I mean, it reminds me of this idea I've been thinking about a lot, which is we're seeing a more and more fractured world when it comes to shared knowledge about what's funny and what's not funny, right? Back in the 90s, everybody watched the same shows and the same channels and, you know, Chris Farley, oh, he's funny, and SNL. Now it's like, yeah, I know this obscure YouTuber has got 5,000 followers, but he's so good. And then it's what's funny for someone, what's common knowledge funny for someone is no longer the case. So I could see a day and time when that just becomes almost impossible to be clever about something. It's because of how fractured we are with the content we consume.
And that's why I go back to like certain frameworks. One of the frameworks I do specifically as far as relating to email, it's what I call the hands up, shoulder shrug. Like, I don't know if you're doing this, right?
Yeah, tell me about that. We talked about that, you and I, when we first met. I want to hear more about that. Like, how does that help you in your content? You know, we're talking specifically in the we're talking about in the cold email space, right?
Yeah, and even I've been testing out like that shoulder shrug, like hands up approach, even on LinkedIn as a first line to drive impressions and engagement on posts, and it seems to work too.
In DMs, you're saying, or in your content?
Just on
somehow in your
content,
posts?
like just posting, doing a hands up. And I guess I'll define that. Hands up, shoulder shrug is like, I don't know if this is something you struggle with. I don't know, but maybe it is. And then people are like, I don't know. Maybe it is. I got to read to find out. I don't know. But that approach is really solid because to your point, you talk about this disparity of what's funny and what's not. There's also this disparity of everyone's telling me I have an issue and they don't even know me. Everyone's telling me they can save me money. And maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but I think we're doing okay with our money, right? If I'm a CFO, I'm like, I think I'm doing great with my job. Like, what do you mean I can save more money? Like, that's kind of offensive. You know, VP of sales, maybe it's like your more reps can hit quota. It's like, I have 85% rep quota attainment. What do you mean? Like that, I'm ignoring you too. I'm offended, you know, like, and that's, so the hands up, shoulder shrug is like, hey, I don't know if this is something you're struggling with. Maybe you are. And then I don't even say maybe you are. I just go, I don't know if this is something you're struggling with. I transition to, but someone else in your industry has, but I have, or this person has. And this is what they did to overcome it. And these are the results they saw. Want to learn more?
I love the way you framed that. Hands up, shoulder shrug. It's an attitude of humble curiosity or humble advice. I like the way you put that. And that's worked for you, huh?
Yeah. I mean, you talked about how you respond to that cold email. That's been a framework I've been testing and trying to like, not perfect per se, but if there's a common theme among emails that have done well, it's that approach. And when I mean emails that do well, I'm not talking about emails that like have a 1% answer rate, or even like a 1% booking rate. I'm talking about emails that get a 3 to 5% booking rate with like a 5 to 10% response rate.
You attribute it to that attitude, that writing that comes through in that type of wording that you use.
Exactly, I do. Yeah, because I've tried it other ways where it's like, question, first line, here's some value, open to learning more. Would you be opposed to learning more? Like all those like verbal judo call to actions, you know? And they're all, I generally just get like a 1% reply and everything's sitting around that 1%, which is a good benchmark, right? Like I think that's the benchmark for everyone that does cold
Yeah, it's a
email.
very good, I mean, a 1% acquisition rate or whatever you want to call it, conversion or open across the board for cold is decent. That's the, I'd say, middle of the pack, right?
Yeah,
What you want to
exactly.
aim for.
Yeah, I think that's great. I found out if you want to pull that lever more, um, and to have what I'd call like massive growth, you've got to play around with things and get that 1% to 3%. Um, and that means
That's a really
changing.
big change, actually.
Yeah, no,
I mean, I've played with email marketing. I've done cold outreach. You know, it wasn't email even, but back in the day, I used to write letters with uh, donation request letters from our local community and our regional nonprofit, the one I mentioned before. And we called them acquisition campaigns and cultivation campaigns. It's like before there was email, there was letters, and a 1% response rate on an acquisition campaign was good. It was the norm. And it's funny how it just translates exactly to email. So for us to get a 3 to 5% would have been like, whoa, hold, stop everything. Like, what are we doing that's so good? So to hear you say that is really impressive. It's just a simple shift of an attitude that comes in the words you write. Is there any other way that that shows up, or is it just in that? I mean, it just seems too simple. Honestly, it just seems too simple. Do you think it's an attitude that informs the way you write the rest of your stuff, or tell me about that?
I do. I think the more and more I'm on social media, and I consume a lot, but I also consume it to research in the sense of what's working. Too many people that aren't well known try to give advice, and they try to tell people how to live their life. And I think that works if you're like Tony Robbins and you've been around for 20 years and you have a cult like following, you know, and you create a cult like experience. But if you don't have that, then you have to be the humble questioner, the humbly, like the curiously humble person and say, look, I don't know if this is what you're struggling with, but I do. And this is how I know I'm struggling with it. And this is how I overcome it. What about that resonates with you? And they go, honestly, I don't really struggle with that, but I do struggle with this. And I think I could probably apply that and solve this by doing that. Yeah, it's great. You know, I just think that attitude, we don't have enough of it. And I think people find it refreshing. I think we've gotten, there was this big book back when I was starting called the Challenger Sales, and it had already been like 5, 7 years old. They did a big, massive study about which type of sales rep is the best sales rep, and it's the Challenger sales rep, the person who questions people.
I'm not in sales, but I know about the Challenger method. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just about someone who questions people's decisions, and I think we've misinterpreted that to mean we tell people they're wrong, and I don't think that's what it was getting at. It was getting at someone who offers an opposing viewpoint in a way that's hands up, shoulder shrug. Like, hey, look, I don't know if that's the right idea, but this might be a better one. And I only say that because company X that we helped was struggling with something similar. And this is the results that we were able to provide for them. But you go back to a reference point, you go back to a proof point, you go back to something that you know has worked in the past because you've done it, you've seen the results, the paths are similar. If you don't have that, the hands up, shoulder shrug doesn't really work.
Yeah, you gotta have proof points. You gotta have authority on that topic, like the data. You gotta have the data to back it up. I love the way you approach that. The way I'm hearing this from you, Conrad. I haven't heard anyone talk about this as succinctly as you have, but it's this idea of like humble thought leadership. One way that you could put it, like, I don't know if I have all the right answers, but here's what's worked for me, and maybe this will work for you.
And people love that. Like you saying that right now gives me chills. I'm like, yeah, I'll listen to you. Like, but that's because I've struggled with that. Like even as a teenager, I'm like, hey, I'm struggling with studying. I go to my teachers and they go, well, do this, you're doing this wrong. And I try it and it doesn't work for me. And then I feel like a failure. I feel like I don't know how to learn. And then it takes me going to like therapy and realizing, oh, I see the world a different way. Because I see the world a different way means I'm going to learn in a different way. And so let me apply that to my learnings. And then I excel in school and then I do way better. And then I'm like, oh, I'm not dumb. Like I can achieve. So
I like your approach, Conrad. It's like you're giving permission for your audience to think for themselves and to be their own best judge of what they need.
Yeah. And then that they are, right? And I think sometimes as marketers, we try to force people to say, no, we're the best judges and we're not.
You're absolutely right. There's been so many times I've learned this. I've been humbled so many times in my career as a marketer. Before I was doing video content, I did email, I did, in-store campaigns, I did all the things, you name it, I've done it. And one of the things I learned, I came from a graphic design background. And in graphic design, there is very much the rules of graphic design, right? This hierarchy thing, if you use white, eyes will be drawn there versus use black. And there's certain rules that you want to follow. And I had that rigidity when I entered into the marketing world and I started dipping my toes into more marketing tasks versus just graphic design. But one of the things I discovered over the years was some of the best ideas, if not all of the best ideas, were done collaboratively when you involve non-marketers, when they don't have this idea of how it should work and you have an open mind to that. So I really resonate with what you're saying about there, you can't go around prescribing your solutions to everybody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on that, like, I still relearn this lesson all the time. I was working for a client probably a few months ago, and I was like pretty rigid because I was like, no, this is how we have to start it. And they're like, well, maybe, but we've seen some success doing this. And I'm like, nope, can't do that. And then we do it my way and it tanks. So I'm like, oh man, like I probably lost this contract. And I didn't, like, not then. I lost it for different reasons, but not for that. They were like, hey, like this didn't work out. Can we try this campaign? I was like, okay, cool. Let me take away this prescriptive attitude and come at this as a learning attitude of what don't I know and what's going on here? How can I get the extra context that I'm missing and improve this campaign with some of the knowledge that I have? And after we did that, it improved by 3x, right? And so like that was a big reminder of this learning and everything we talked about, that like, yes, there are rules, but those rules, they're like guidelines, right? Like, I mean, it's like the Pirates of the Caribbean line, right? Like the pirate code, it's like, we think of them more as guidelines, big movie buff, by the way. So every time I say that, I think of movies.
I just quoted that this morning in a call and said, where I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So yeah, we as marketers and salespeople, we love rules and procedures because it's like, oh, cool, this means we can be successful, but it's only within that context of the client you're working with.
Very, very contextual.
Yeah, and I think we
going back to the
forget
first
that.
thing you said.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone hates that. Everyone's like, what do you mean it depends? Why can't you promise
Give
me?
me the hack. Give me the rule.
Give me the
I just
rule.
want to
Yeah.
rinse and repeat. And that's that. I would argue that's the lazy way to do marketing. That's a hack that may not work, but it's about it takes people who know what they're doing, are humble enough to try different things and execute on it, which is my takeaway here from what you told me today.
Yeah. And I've been to therapy and I've been to a lot of therapy and met a lot of therapists, and that's not a brag. That's a bad thing. I had a lot of issues and I've worked through a good chunk of them. And the longer I've been in therapy and the more therapists I meet, the more I realize they don't have a set of rules. They have guidelines that influence how they talk to people, but what they say and how they coach someone is totally different dependent on their personality types, the way they learn, the way they absorb information. But the end goal with everyone in therapy is the same. How do I get these people to manage their stresses and anxieties and depression by the triggers they experience and how they experience them? That's the end goal for all of them. And they accomplish it, even though it's different in application for every person that visits them. And that just blows my mind. It's like, okay, cool. We have these set of principles that influences the help we receive, but the way it's applied is different because everyone we work with is different. And that's just something we forget. So,
well, thank you, Conrad, for this awesome conversation. I feel you keep talking about a lot of this stuff. This stuff really scratches an itch for me in terms of how to think about content marketing, and really love your approach. I think it's really refreshing. Anything else you want to leave with us before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I think along with that line of everything it depends is you never know something's good until you try it. So if you're like, oh, these are good ideas, but I have my own, try your own ideas. And be humble enough to accept that they didn't work. But that's the process of learning and becoming and finding a successful idea, is this idea of accepting that failure is part of the process and it's temporary. It is not a reflection of you. It's not a reflection of your ability and capabilities. It's just part of the process. So don't be afraid of that failure. Learn to accept it, even if it makes you uncomfortable, and manage those negative thoughts that come when you struggle with it. Manage those thoughts and tune them out, because they're not real. What's real is you and you trying to accomplish what you want.
Well said. Thank you for that encouraging thought, Conrad. Great ending to end on. Where can we learn more about you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm always on. As part of my job is to write for people on LinkedIn, so I'm always on LinkedIn. Reach out to me there. Conrad Zolman. It's a unique name. There's only one of me. Well, there's like my fake profile and my real profile. My real profile has my picture. The other one has no photo. So go for the one with the photo.
Thanks for the tip for those of us who want to connect with you. All right. Thank you, Conrad, so much. Thanks for being here.
See ya.